that selected item, right? Selected date that to long date string. Alright? And it basically when you load this, okay, so you might be asking, this is SharePoint, why are you showing it in ASP.NET? Because I want to show you that if you're doing things like that in ASP.NET, you could also do that like that in SharePoint. So we select something there, okay, and then it will basically handle the the event. Okay, so let's do that in SharePoint, right? So I have here a project on SharePoint, and then I can add a visual web part, new item, and then visual web part, and then let's call this calendar. Oops, calendar. All right, click add, and then because I don't want to type in anything there, I can just go to the toolbox and then drag the calendar and then format it. Okay. And then, of course, because I'm just dragging and drop, I can just simply add the label. Alright. And then double click. And then I'm tired of typing, so I just copy my syntax somewhere. Okay, copy that. Hopefully we have the, we have the, oops. Okay. I can go to the code. There we go. Okay, so let's try to build this project. Alright, so let me now, assuming that I have the appropriate permission to the SharePoint, let me now deploy this. Deploy. Okay. Now, when you are building a SharePoint project, you're going to tell SharePoint whether or not you're going to build a sandbox project or a farm project. So there's a big difference between the two projects. So in a sandbox project, it's a very the functionality of your SharePoint solution is going to be limited in terms of accessing the resources of the SharePoint portal. No? That includes not having access to the file system of the SharePoint. Okay, so what I did here, I created a farm solution which allows me to actually deploy a visual web part. So if I'm going to create a sandbox project, I may not be able to deploy my my project, primarily because the sandbox project doesn't have access to the file system of the SharePoint portal. Okay, so there you go. I was able to deploy that. Let me go back to my sales promo website, and then I'm going to add. Well, let me add a new page. Okay, so let's call the page. Let's say this is going to be calendar page. Alright. Alright, so let me add, let's say, calendar. There you go. So I can actually insert, a web part. Okay, go to the custom, and then you're gonna see the calendar there. Add it there. Okay, it's already done. Okay, I can save it. Alright, and then if I select something on there, from there, no, it shows the information. Okay. Come on guys, this is pretty good, right? This is something that you need to, to take into account if you would like to really move, from being an ASP.NET programmer to becoming a SharePoint programmer, right? Anyway, so that is one thing, is one of the easiest things that you could do with SharePoint, with developing an application for SharePoint. So probably the other speakers are going to deal also or talk about another more easy functionalities when of SharePoint that can easily be developed or accessed within tools available in SharePoint Designer and also Visual Studio. So I'm going to get question later on so that I can allow the other speakers to talk about their topics. And for more information, you could go to sharepoint.microsoft.com or you could visit our website, thoughtworks.com. And if you would like to get in touch with me, you could look at those phone numbers. I can give you my my PowerPoint slide if you want to, or you can send an email to alan@thoughtworks.com. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Juan. Set up na natin. In any SharePoint article, usually this illustration is presented. It simply means that SharePoint is not simply a portal. It is not simply a tool to automatically create a site, but SharePoint, it is designed also to create, like for example, a business intelligence site, something like that. It is also a search tool where it has a built-in search mechanism. It is also designed to create, like for example, context, like workflow, like automated business processes, like content management. So all those things in the illustration are the pillars, are the significant, the significant pillars of the product. So, significant pa lang yan. Wala pa yung ibang pillars dyan. Ang hirap na kasing i-drawing kung masyadong magulo. But, basta at least, when we say SharePoint, we're dealing of those pillars. Let me select only some of the slides. I'm not going to discuss all these things. Let me focus first on this one. You know, SharePoint, when you deploy SharePoint, you have two options. Where Ken, I think, will be discussing that later thoroughly. That we could deploy SharePoint on-premise. If you have the server, you could deploy the product in your location. Or we could now make use of SharePoint Online. SharePoint Online is a part of Office 365, where Ken has just recently written a book on that. So, I don't know if Office 365 is already available in the Philippines. As far as I know, parang mukhang hindi pa. Unfortunately, for some reasons. Yeah. But, Ken and I has an occasion to work for an Office 365 application. And it is a very nice hosting environment provided to us by Microsoft. So, again, you could deploy it on-premise, or you could deploy it in a hosted environment or in a hosted service like SharePoint Online in Office 365. And obviously, as illustrated, if you are going to deploy SharePoint, you could deploy it as an intranet site, or you could deploy it as an extranet site, or you could deploy it as an internet site. So we have all those options. Then obviously, when you develop SharePoint, you need tools. And basically, Alan has said, we have two basic tools. We have the SharePoint Designer, and we have the Visual Studio. In the book of Ken, developing SharePoint 2010 for Dummies, Ken has redefined this term development, and I think Ken will be discussing on that later. But the summary of everything, that when we say SharePoint development, we are not talking here directly of developing stuff by writing a code. Unfortunately, that is our mindset when we say developer. We're thinking immediately of someone who writes a code in Visual Studio, something else. But in the world of SharePoint, developing something for SharePoint doesn't mean immediately using Visual Studio, because SharePoint itself has provided us the development tool using the browser. SharePoint itself has provided us already the development tool, like what Alan has illustrated a while ago, that Alan has created a site using the tool provided by SharePoint itself. So, therefore, when we say SharePoint development, we are talking here of the tools provided by SharePoint itself. We have the SharePoint Designer for non-developers, and we have of course the Visual Studio, which is designed exactly to create a very complex or a highly customized SharePoint components. Okay, so let me present to you my next two slides. This is just only a summary of all the slides that I have for us developers. What are the things that we could underline when we say SharePoint 2010 development? Microsoft has provided us these three items. Developer productivity, we have the rich platform services, and we have flexible deployment as a developer. What those three things mean? First, when we say developer productivity, Microsoft has provided us a first-class SharePoint developer tools. First class in the sense that it is stable and it is very easy to use. Starting, I've said, from the built-in tools provided by SharePoint portal itself. Using the browser, we have the SharePoint Designer, where we could easily create a workflow through a wizard. So all those first-class tools are provided by us, by Microsoft, to create or to develop our SharePoint site. And with SharePoint 2010 and Visual Studio 2010, we could now debug our SharePoint custom components. Unlike the previous release of Visual Studio and SharePoint, we are not capable of debugging our custom built SharePoint component. But again, with Visual Studio 2010, we could now debug our SharePoint custom component. And of course, we have already a developer dashboard provided to us. And also, not to mention that the developer dashboard is providing us information on the, like for example, on the size or on the resources that your custom component will consume once it will be deployed in the production environment. Secondly, when we say SharePoint 2010 for developers, we are talking here of the rich platform services provided by Microsoft. And of course, I want to underline these four items. We have the business connectivity services. One of the services that I love most in the product. Because with business connectivity services, you could now easily connect to your line of business applications. Like for example, you have your human resource application. And your company wants to put everything, all the applications, in a single portal, so it could be done easily via SharePoint. You have an accounting system, bringing it to SharePoint, no problem. You could make use of the business data connectivity. You have an SAP or SAP, no problem. You could bring your SAP data to SharePoint environment. Like for example, you have Microsoft Dynamics, you have Navision, no problem. Your accounting data could easily be brought inside SharePoint portal to have almost a one-stop shop that everything is on the same portal. Obviously, again, through the aid of the business connectivity services available inside SharePoint. Another one, before, when we create custom stuff for SharePoint, we directly consume the so-called server object model for SharePoint. A server object model, if you are going to draw, like for example, a high-level architectural diagram for SharePoint, the server object model is almost like the application layer codes that we have in our ASP.NET application. Before, we directly consume that server object model. but for now in 2010,